Before joining Congress, I had the honor to serve as the vice chair of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. To provide a bit more context, I'd note that my family and I have lived and breathed New Mexico for 17 generations. We are proud to be a part of its rich history and culture. I introduced H.R. 6589, the Historic Preservation Enhancement Act, so that we can preserve places of struggle and perseverance across America. I also want to emphasize that H.R. 6589 is needed as well so that we can rebuild our infrastructure efficiently and responsibly after the enactment of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And also so that we can support local economic development and jobs, especially for rural communities. The Historic Preservation Enhancement Act provides permanent authorization to the Historic Preservation Fund, or HPF, and does double its deposit to $300 million per year. The bill would also make amounts in the HPF available for expenditure without further congressional appropriations. I'm amazed at all the good that the Historic Preservation Fund does. Let me share a bit of that with you. It provides matching grants to states, tribes, and local governments and nonprofit organizations to pay for surveys, training, and grants. The Historic Preservation Fund also supports important competitive grant programs like the American Civil Rights Grants Program, the Paul Brune Historic Revitalization Grants Program. These investments have enabled things like 2 Main Street revitalization projects in Brigham City, Utah. The Idaho State Historic Preservation Office's work to complete a nomination for the Nez Perce Tribe's Rapid River Fishery. The 2-story adobe hacienda at the Los Luceros Historic Site in my district, and so much more across all of our districts, across all of America. But despite chronic underfunding, and it has been underfunded for decades, for more than 4 decades, it's been underfunded. Despite this, the HPF has facilitated nearly 90,000 listings on the National Register, surveyed millions of acres to protect significant cultural resources, and listen to this, it has leveraged over $100 billion in private investment through the historic tax credit, $100 billion. That tax credit has rehabilitated 47,000 historic buildings and created nearly 3 million local jobs. This is a job bill as well. We need to remember that. But we need to recognize the value of the HPF and help it meet the growing needs of state and tribal historic preservation officers and communities across our country. While the additional funding and long-term certainty provided this bill will enable state and tribal historic preservation officers to better protect our culture, our herencia, and facilitate infrastructure and economic development. Through the National Historic Preservation Act, federal agencies must consider how their projects impact historic properties. This means SHPOs and TIPOs are a key part of advancing many projects. In fiscal year 2021, SHPO offices reviewed over 124,000 federal undertakings. That's 2,100 per office per year. This is an increase of close to 14,000 reviews from the previous fiscal year. TIPOs face the same growing demand. I proudly voted for the bipartisan infrastructure law because I know how important it is to invest in clean water for our communities, broadband for our school children's education, telehealth and businesses, and roads so that our commerce can get to market and supply chains can get unclogged. Aren't we all in favor of that kind of good work on the ground that makes our community stronger? Well, while the infrastructure bill was an amazing achievement, who in this committee would be against getting that infrastructure actually built? Well, to get that broadband built, we need to comply with the Section 106 process, and that means our TIPOs and SHPOs need the funding to clear the projects. So while some of my colleagues may be concerned with some aspects of the bill, I would say that HPF is just too important. In fact, Congress has chosen to provide mandatory funding to other programs it considers critical, like it did for the Land and Conservation Fund on a bipartisan basis. We must fully fund our historic preservation officers as we undertake the historic investments in infrastructure and as we build a richer and more prosperous and equitable America. I welcome the opportunity to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and the administration to make any necessary adjustments to the bill, and I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you. I yield back.